Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's multi-cloud live stream. If you've been watching with us, you know that these typically take place every Tuesday and Thursday, but we will be taking a break next week for VMworld. So if you haven't already signed up, make sure you're registered. We will add a link into the chat so you can have that as a quick reference. And we will also say that these recordings are taking place. So if you want to watch them on demand, you can check them out on the VMware Cloud YouTube channel. Today, David and I are really excited to be joined by Daniel. So Daniel, do you mind just giving us a brief intro to who you are and what we'll be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lauren. So I'm Daniel Patterson. I'm a multi-cloud architect for VMware. And today we're going to chat about deploying Google Cloud VMware Engine and connecting Google Cloud VMware Engine workloads to a Google native service, Google Cloud SQL. So I'll take you through how that's all connected, give you some design considerations, and then show you a Postgres connection from a workload running in the VMware Engine environment.
Awesome. And yeah, as a reminder to the audience, if you do have any questions, make sure you add those into the comments from wherever you're watching, and we'll make sure that we address those on the call. But with that, we'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks. So is everyone able to see my screen right now? I've got a diagram shared up here. We good with that, Lauren?
Let's see. It is there.
There we go. Beautiful.
I was I was looking for it. There must have been a delay because I was like, it shows
creating
it says
suspense.
remove and it's not up
there.
Yeah.
All good.
Creating suspense here.
All good. Yeah. So this is a very high-level diagram of what we're talking about today. Right. We've got the Google Cloud VMware Engine private cloud on the right-hand side, where you could have virtual machine or container workloads running in that VMware environment, and it's all built on top of vSphere, NSX, and vSAN. Right. And then we've just got this simple, arrow, this DB connection that's going to Cloud SQL. So I'm going to focus more on, how that connection is established to Cloud SQL and how you go about provisioning Cloud SQL. So to do that, there we go. We'll get to this next diagram, which kind of gives us a little more detail inside what's going on the left-hand side where I just had that Cloud SQL icon. So whenever you're consuming Google Cloud VMware Engine, you also have your native VPC network, and that's on the left here. So this could be an existing VPC network that you already have in Google or in GCP. It could be a new VPC network that you deploy, but in this context, I'm going to call this the GCVE peered VPC network, and I'll talk a little bit about what this connectivity looks like, as well as what this connectivity looks like, and I'll refer back to this diagram to keep everybody well oriented. But the point here is that we are actually going to be deploying this Cloud SQL instance in this middle box. This is the private services access Google producer VPC network, and I'll again orient you back to this diagram whenever I'm showing you what this looks like in the GCP console. And it's worth highlighting that if you have compute engine workloads or GPU workloads, right, that are running in that Google VPC network, they would exist over on the left-hand side, and you could absolutely integrate your vSphere workloads with those compute engine or GPU focused workloads or other Google native services like Cloud Build. But today we're talking about Cloud SQL.
Hey, Daniel, quick question. This is all showing everything on the Google Cloud platform. I assume that you could extend this diagram and there'd be a connection back into the data center if you're running workloads there on VMware as well, right?
Yeah, solid question. So on the way that would work is on the left, there would be a cloud router attached to that VPC network, and you would peer via BGP or via BGP over a VPN connection or a cloud interconnect, and you'd be able to access your on-prem resources from both the VPC network, the GCP VPC network, or the Google Cloud VMware Engine environment. So yeah, good point. So all right, so let's start with this VPC network, and let me orient you to the VPC network that we're going to be working with today. So I'll jump over here to the GCP console. I've got a project that I'm working with here. It's the MCA GCP GCVE project. I'm going to hop down into the VPC network menu here. And we're going to work with this MCA VPC demo project. And so what I want to highlight is that connection on the left. So that VPC peering connection, that's that private services access connection here on the left. And that is represented within the UI by this service networking Google APIs peering connection. So this provides us access to the Google managed service, which is Google Cloud VMware Engine. And this also provides access to the Cloud SQL instance as well. And so let's hop into, let's go on the other side, right? The Google Cloud VMware Engine side. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So if I hop over to the, I can just search VMware Engine within the tab here or within the search bar, or I could have gone to it over in the over here, right? So once I pull up VMware Engine, page will load here shortly. Let's minimize my tabs. Should have preloaded. There we go. All right. So once I'm in the GCV interface, this is how I control the number of clusters that I have, or sorry, the number of private clouds that I have. So the number of VMware like SDDC instances that I have, or the size of the cluster. Basically, this is just how you manage your GCVE environment. And if I drop down into the instance, I can, the GCP instance, I can see that I've got vCenter info that I can go use to log into the environments. I can see where it's located, US West 2. So lots of good information about the cluster cluster management information. Now, if I jump over here to the network configuration, there's also a tab for private connections. And so this private connection represents this private connection here. And I've already got an existing private connection. These do take a little bit of time to provision, but when I say that, it's about 15 minutes. Can be a little bit less, but it's a little long for me to deploy this in the demo. But what I can show you is some kind of tips on provisioning this interface. So right now I've already got this private connection, right? And that represents our path to get to this shared environment. And I already showed you the private services access connection that represents the left-hand side. So, let's say that I needed to create one of these connections. And I think this is important because it can be maybe a little bit confusing if it's the first time. So if I go to add a new private connection, and I select the same region, so US West 2, it's asking me for several bits of information. So this peer project ID number and VPC ID, as well as this tenant project ID. And this tenant project ID is what can be a little bit confusing. So it's pretty obvious what the peer project ID and project number and VPC ID are. So if I go over on my project that I showed you earlier, I could go to the home dashboard and get the project number, project ID, and the project name. So that takes care of these three fields. But the question is, where does this come from?
On the project, does that represent a specific environment? Is that like an SDDC, or is that something else? Basic. What's the parameter of a project?
Yeah, so a project can contain multiple resources. It can contain compute engine resources. It can contain your multiple VPC networks or other services like file store. And in reality, this project will also contain our Cloud SQL instance that we'll deploy here shortly. So
it's sort of a logical grouping of a collection of things that represent something meaningful to you, basically.
Yeah. And many times, customers have multiple projects, right? Depending on the way that the application is structured, or maybe the way that the organization is structured. But in this case, I'm working with a single project. So for us, I've showed you how you'd get the project ID and the project number. The VPC ID, I just need to drop down into the VPC network that I mentioned earlier. And I've got the VPC ID here. So that's just the name of the VPC, basically. Now the last one, this tenant project ID, that one's a little nuanced. So that one is over here in the service networking Google APIs. Notice that there's this peered project ID that's listed here. So this peered project ID, it represents this project in the center, and that's what the GCVE dialog wants. So we basically take this peered project ID, toss it into the tenant project ID, and not really sure what pasted in there. We take this project ID and then we can paste it in here. Looks like I hit a hotkey there too. There we go. And then we can create that peering connection. So I'm not going to create one. I've already got one, right? But that's how this one was created. And then after we created that connection, I can go into the details of that connection. And this is just a network connection, so it's all about routing. So right now it's saying no routes found. It takes a second to populate. It'll pop up, and this is showing me all the routes for internal networks that are either provisioned within this VPC network. So like 10.222.0.0/24, or networks that are being learned by a Google Cloud interconnect that we also have. So in this case, this dynamic peering route, that's being learned from a Google Cloud interconnect that's attached to this VPC network that I showed you earlier. And then there are local subnets as well that would show up in this table. And then routes are also exported from this connection as well, and they'll show up. They'll show up in this dialog as well. So it's important to highlight here that the perspective of this peering connection is a little bit nuanced, right? Because if you take a look at this 10.222.248.0/24, that doesn't exist over here. It doesn't exist in the VMware environment. This subnet actually exists as an existing route in the private services access environment. So it's showing you that route that's being exported, from this environment into GCVE.
Just on that, Daniel. So that's sort of like a middle ground, right? That's like where you're deploying cloud services from Google into your private cloud, right? Is that the way to look at it, or is it something else?
Yeah. It's basically that shared area between the Google Cloud VMware Engine environment and the Google native native compute instances.
So those same services would be available in the Google in the native instances, but they're sort of running in your logically running in your environment. Is that right, or is that the way to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way to think about it is that the services that are available to just native compute engine instances in Google, those same services are all available to your VMware workloads that are running in Google Cloud VMware Engine. So it gives you that really nice flexibility to be able to consume those Google native services from your VMware workloads that are, maybe some of them are running in Google Cloud VMware Engine because they need to be adjacent to those Google services. And then some of those other VMware workloads are running on-prem because they have latency requirements that need to place them closer to resources that are in, say, a warehouse or manufacturing facility or something like that, right? But yeah, it's basically that middle ground between Google Cloud VMware Engine and your native workloads running on Compute Engine or GPU instances. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked about how we would create this connection, how we would create this connection. So let's talk about creating this database connection to Cloud SQL and creating the Cloud SQL instance. So if I drop back over to my project, right? I can go to the SQL service, and we already have one SQL instance here, but I'm going to deploy another one. And we'll just create a Postgres instance, and I'm just going to call it test demo. Let's just keep it short and go with test. I'll generate a password, and we're going to delete this instance, so don't really care if you see that. You could select a lot of different options. I'm just going to select version 13. I want to keep this in the same region that my instance is located in. I could have a database instance in a different region than my Google Cloud VMware Engine environment, but you probably wouldn't want to do that, right? You would want to keep the latency as low as possible for your database connections. So I'm going to select US West 2. I could select multiple availability zones or multiple zones for high availability, but I'm just going to select a single zone. And then, and most importantly, to deploy this in the way that we're talking about, I have to drop down to this advanced section and select private IP. If I selected public IP, then that SQL instance is going to get a public IP address, and you would have to maintain a whitelist for connectivity. And in most cases, you don't want your database server to have a public IP, right? So you want it to have a private IP. So I've selected private IP, and I've got a couple of options here. Because this project has multiple VPC networks, I have the ability to select multiple VPC networks. But in this case, I've already showed you that this VPC network is the one that is the GCV peered VPC network. So I'm going to select this one. If I selected the other ones, the Cloud SQL instance would essentially be deployed in some other VPC network that's not pictured here, right? And you wouldn't really be able to access it. So you got to make sure that you select the right VPC network.
Yeah,
hey, Daniel. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just to go back to the public IP scenario, is there any instance where that might make sense for a customer, or why you would want to do it in a public IP as opposed to the private connection?
There are probably situations where there are publicly facing apps that are maybe distributed across not only GCP, but maybe in other cloud environments. And instead of having to build VPN connectivity, you could access that database connection over the internet. So it kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility if you have an application that doesn't have strict performance requirements on database connectivity, and you want to be able to access that database server from a public IP. But I think for most enterprises and most use cases, you're going to want a private IP. The public IP was the original scenario that was available for Cloud SQL. No private IP was even available. So this is somewhat of a new feature. I think it's been out for quite some time at this point, but originally public IP was the only option that you had, and that's just what Google started with. After that, they added a SQL proxy that would still use the public IP, but it would let you deploy proxy inside your environment to make the connectivity a little bit more secure. And then finally, they added private IP capabilities so that you could connect with a private IP. Because again, most enterprises don't want their
data everywhere.
data everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and in most cases, the database is talking to another application, right? It's something that's doing the transactions. It's it's the front end app with the load balancer or something. So
Right.
that's sometimes what's connected to the public, and then the back
Exactly.
end is like there's no reason to see it. The only thing I can think of some scenario where the the app is on the public side, right? Like maybe your field collection or something, right? And then it's sort of transmitting stuff back, but it's like super controlled, right? But yeah, it's just you generally just don't see it.
Yep. Yeah, and the use case here would be, you've migrated a workload into Google Cloud VMware Engine, right? Because you've got a cloud strategy that's pushing a lot of your workloads into public clouds, and you're using Google Cloud VMware Engine as an accelerator, right? And then immediately after that, you want to offload the management activities associated with managing databases, right?
Mhm.
Database instances. And so you may still have your front end application running within GCVE, but then you just take this database and push it into Cloud SQL.
So you can leverage the Cloud SQL service that Google offers, but still maintain that environment.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Still maintain like the rest of the application.
Right.
Yeah. And I was just going to make one point because we've seen this over and over, that sort of the place you have to spend a lot of time is thinking about sort of the network interconnections and sort of what networks you're going to use and all that, whether on any cloud provider. It seems like that's one of the areas really you have to really be thoughtful and think about sort of how you're going to lay out the network and what talks to what, and that's it's always been complicated, right? Networking is always still a bit challenging. Takes probably the most time of anything I've seen, no matter who the cloud provider is.
For sure. Now, in this dialogue here, we can select things, about backups and how we want to structure our maintenance intervals. We can set other information associated with flags. We can go ahead and enable query insights, which I'm actually going to go ahead and do. That's an additional feature, but I get it free for 7 days, and we're only going to have this for a few minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and enable it. And then you can also add labels.
The challenge is
basically
forgetting,
tags.
right?
Yeah.
We all do that, right? We're like, oh, free, boom, and we like do it, and then like, oh, it's 9 days, and they're like, oh crap.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and create this instance, and we need to delete an instance. You can't use. Oh, that's right. We have to do that. So we'll do create. So I had previously created an instance called test, just to validate, everything was going to work here. It won't let you create 2 instances with the same name, even though I deleted the old instance. I guess there's some metadata that Google keeps around on the back end for a couple days. So if you try to do a, rapid fire create, recreate, or create, delete, recreate, that won't work out for you. So I just added an iterator. So this will take just a short few minutes to provision, and we'll end up with an IP address that we can connect to. Now, I saved this discussion about the IP address until now because I knew we'd be waiting on this instance to deploy. So you're probably asking, where does that IP address come from, right? Daniel, you're telling me that we're going to deploy a database server in this box, right? And you've told me how to, how these connections work here, but you haven't told me like how these get addressed, right? How these services get addressed. And so to look at that, we have to go back to. I'm going to duplicate my tab here. We have to go back to that private services connection that I talked about at the very beginning, right? So this one right here, this private services access connection. And if we go back to that connection, so to get there, we go to this VPC networks. We'll minimize that. We'll go to our VPC network. And when I go to this, I see my service network connection, but there's also a subnet that ends up getting associated to this. So let's see. Might be best for me to create Oops. Went a little too far back there. There we go. Yeah, this will work. So when I created that service network connection, whenever this VPC was brand new, I came in here and I allocated an IP range. So I said allocate an IP range, and I called it Cloud SQL. I defined a subnet, like 192.168.0.0/24, and then I went ahead and allocated that. Now, in this case, I just named this Cloud SQL. I could have named this, Daniel's test, right? I could have named this anything. The thing is that this is not allocated to anything right now. It just exists as a range. So what happens is that whenever you go and create the peering connection, you end up, whenever you go create the private connections to services, you go create that connection and you select the range that you want. So I selected Google Cloud Platform, and I selected, this range in that case. And so this range is the one that is essentially allocated for services that get provisioned in this environment. So whenever this comes up, we should have an IP address that's in this 10.222.248.0/24 network. So let me cancel out of that, and we'll go back over here. We'll refresh our page and see if we're back up. Yeah, there we go. So 10.222.248.16. Looks like our instance is still creating, but we've at least got an IP address. So that can be a little bit confusing, right? Because you're essentially creating this connection, and you're defining the IP address whenever you're creating this connection. But you've got to, if you think about it from kind of start to finish, you start with this VPC network. None of this other stuff exists necessarily. And then you create this connection, and when you create this connection, it creates this box in the middle. And so that's why you specify you allocate that IP range whenever you're creating this private services access connection.
Right.
And then
so
after you've done that, then you can create the private connection.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? Because you're going to put things into the box. At some point you're going to have to assign IPs to the things on that subnet. So you just define the range up front, right, as part of the whole process.
Yep. And let's go ahead and copy this out. And I've got an instance within Google Cloud VMware Engine here that I've logged into. So I'm just going to try to, let's see, let me get my command so I don't have to type everything out here. And let's see if we can connect. What's going on here?
The demo gods have shown up.
Right? What is the... Have caps lock on? Let's see.
Usually the culprit.
No, I don't. What? Oh, gotta SSH to the instance first. That was my that was my local computer. There we go. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we are in the virtual machine that's running in Google Cloud VMware Engine. There we go.
Right.
There we go. Now we should be able to run this, and we've got a connection on port 5432 to our instance. Just a quick in-map to make sure that port is open. So the other thing that we'll check out here. Whoops, now notice I can't actually ping it, and it's worth highlighting that Google by default blocks a lot of ICMP. So don't be surprised if you provision a service and try to ping it and it doesn't work. Don't use that as your measure of whether or not it's up. Consider using something like InMap to actually check the ports or just, testing from the application. Yeah. All right. And this looks like it's fully provisioned now. So let's let me make a connection to it. Sorry, give me 1 second. There we go. I'm gonna have to correct. I didn't actually grab one of my commands that I needed earlier, so do it on the fly real quick. SQL-H. We've got our IP address. -U. -D. So let's go create a database. DemoDB. And we'll do demo DB. And that looks like it should be good. And we need to grab our password that I copied earlier. And look at that, we've got a connection. We'll go ahead and run some SQL commands, create a schema, create a table, add some values, right? We're gonna do our VMware inventory. We've got a VM in there, and it's our warehouse management system. We've got a container in there running on Tanzu. It's our web front end. And then we can go ahead and select our inventory. So there we go. We've connected to our instance. So there's a demo there. And then one other thing that we can do here is we can run, some people may be interested in seeing a PG bench, just a benchmark on the SQL database that gets run. So we'll do that. And we'll generate some more data. And I'm trying to just generate some data so that we have something to look at in the query insights, right? It's boring if we don't have anything. There we go. Some good data in there now. So if we go here, we should see, well, let's look at connections first here. Wait. Oh, this is where I wanted. Yeah. So might have gone a little too fast, but yeah, we can see where we got a little bit of data coming in. Let's see if Query Insights has given us anything interesting yet. We want the demo DB. We could filter down to our user. We don't have anything just yet, but we can still keep, running some more benchmarks here.
Yep. No, it's cool. It's good. We can see that sort of the database is active and running stuff.
Yep. Overall, pretty simple. And how much time we got left, David?
You have a few more minutes if you want to, go a little longer.
Yeah, I think what I can do is I can just pull up just because I haven't really shown anything around vSphere. So if I wanted to access vSphere, so you could actually provision workloads, right? I've got the vSphere UI that's available here. A couple different options to log in. In this case, I'm just going to use the cloud owner GCVE.local username. So we'll toss that one in there. This could be an AD authenticated name as well, username. Lots of different options here. So I'll log in and just kind of prove like here's our 10.122 4.20 box that we've been using, and that's this guy. 10.122 4.20. So that's the box that I've been running all this information from, or all these commands from.
Yeah, hitting the database from this.
Yep. And so that could be something more interesting, but yeah, just a couple command
it's great
lines.
to show it. We love, we always kind of show, hey, look, it looks once you're up and running, you're basically operating in the same way you operate on premise from vSphere for the VM component of this, right? And sort of managing VMs and managing the cluster, et cetera. So it's all good. It's all good. It's cool. It's good. It was good demo.
All right. Any questions from the ether?
No, we get like I said, most of the people see this on replay and on demand, so all good.
All right.
Great. Lauren, any thoughts, any questions?
No, this is great to see. I mean, we were talking just before we jumped on about how, we can see these connections from VMware's SDDC to the other, cloud providers, but actually diving into how that looks within a service and leveraging one of the native cloud provider services. So
yeah, it was good to see sort of the extension from just running VMware stuff to running VMware alongside of cloud services in a provider.
Absolutely. Thank you
Daniel,
so much.
Any last thoughts before you jump off? And please don't jump off right away. But any last thoughts before we kind of transition and move on out?
I think the only thing I'll say is that this demo is all about Cloud SQL, right? But there are other Google services like Cloud Build and many others that also get provisioned in a very similar way. There are some situations where services, some native services, don't get provisioned in this box in the middle. But that's because they're either legacy services or third-party services like NetApp, Cloud Volumes ONTAP. So in Google, when operating in Google, it's good to kind of realize what's in the toolbox, right? This is one thing that's in the toolbox as far as connecting to cloud native services. If your cloud native service is not private services access enabled, which it'll say whether or not it is in the documentation, then that means that it's not going to follow this model. So just look out for that. But the bulk of services follow this private services access model.
Yeah, and I'll put in a plug for some of the videos you and your team have done that are also up on the multi-cloud channel on YouTube. You've got some architecture videos there, which are great. So I hope people can check that out as well. It's a great way to sort of understand some of these services, but also have a sense of sort of how everything connects into them. Hey, before we run out of time here and run off, but I did want to do a couple things. One is mention again that Lauren mentioned that we're going to take a break for VMworld. So I hope everybody can join us for VMworld, and there's no better way to really learn about VMware technologies than VMworld. I think there's some 500, maybe 1,000. I don't know how many shows there are because it's hard to keep track because there's a lot of them are done more than once. But there is just a plethora of content that is an awesome way to sort of learn about what VMware does and sort of the technologies and how they all work together. So please encourage you. I also did want to mention that we said we're going to go off. We're not going to be on during VMworld, and we may be off for a little bit after VMworld as we sort of regroup and sort of figure out the plan for the rest of the year. And I did want to mention that this is our last show with Lauren, who's leaving us for some new adventures, and we wish her well. But I did want to thank her. She's been my co-host on this show since we launched this back in June, so I definitely will miss her. But I did want to thank her and let everybody know that when we come back, she'll be a little different since we won't have Lauren. But we'll do our best to keep plugging along and bringing you some great content. So thank you, Lauren, for everything you did in helping get this show off the ground.
Thanks, David. It's been an absolute pleasure and a joy to learn about all of these new solutions and to be able to talk with so many great presenters and to partner with you on it. So to many more. And for VMworld next week, really looking forward to it. All
right. With that, I want to thank everybody and wish you well. And hopefully we'll see you metaphorically. We won't really see you at VMworld, but hope you're there and we'll hope you get a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.